Towards the end of the Third Age of Middle-earth, a hobbit by the name of Bilbo Baggins left his home on his 111st birthday, and he would travel to the elven city of Rivendell, a place he had visited 50 years prior with a company of dwarves and a wizard. At that time, he had embarked on an adventure like no other hobbit had in living memory, an adventure that he would eventually commit to paper. And he called it My Diary, My Unexpected Journey, There and Back Again, and What Happened After. A very short and concise title, I think we can all agree. But of course, we would know it by its much shorter name, The Hobbit. It doesn't actually say the title on The Hobbit. And decades later, again returning to Rivendell, he would eventually finish this book. But in addition to that, Bilbo also discovered ancient records long held in the archives of Rivendell, and these writings documented the entire history of Arda, the world in which Middle-earth is located. Having knowledge of the Elvish language himself, Bilbo took it upon himself to translate these writings and add it into his Great Red Book. And these writings would be what we come to know as the Silmarillion. Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of my series going over the history of Arda as told in the Silmarillion. While the actual writings of J.R.R. Tolkien that were collected and compiled by his son Christopher Tolkien and published posthumously is called the Silmarillion, this is actually the first episode that covers the main body of the book known as the Quenta Silmarillion. But there are two books that precede the main body that is the Quenta Silmarillion, known as the Ainulindale and the Valaquenta. And in the last video of this series, in the first video of this series, I discussed the creation of the Ainur and the formation of Arda as discussed in the Ainulindale, and we went into more detail on the Valar and Maiar who stepped into creation in the Valaquenta. And I absolutely recommend you watch that video before going into this one, because I am going to be referencing a lot of characters, a lot of names that I discussed in the first video, and I'm not really going to be explaining myself, so I would watch that video first. I'm sure it's tagged up there or has been tagged up there. But here is a brief recap of what we went over in the last video. The Ainulindale gave us a sense of the divine order of this universe that Tolkien had created. We have the supreme creator god Eru, also called Ilúvatar, who created the Ainur with his thought. And the Ainur were essentially a pantheon of greater or lesser spirits that Eru taught how to sing. And from their song, which was emboldened by the flame imperishable, a primeval creative force which is solely bound to Ilúvatar, the Ainur sang the land of Arda into being, and this land is kindled with the flame imperishable being placed in its core, and thus the land comes alive, and Ilúvatar calls it Ea, the world that is. But the Ainur who step into creation and shape the land would call it Arda. Many of the Ainur fell in love with this act of creation and wished to participate in it directly. And so Ilúvatar bound their powers to this creation so that, while they would be just as powerful as they are in the heavenly realms, they would be bound to this creation and unable to leave. And the greatest of these Ainur who stepped into the world were called the Valar, the powers of the world. And they act as basically gods or archangels of the land. And they had many servants who possessed lesser but still great cosmic power, and these beings were called the Maiar. And in the last video, I talked specifically about the names of all of the Valar as well as the domains that each Valar occupy. Some of them embody a specific facet of creation, while others embody more of a metaphysical understanding of the world. For example, we have Ulmo, who is essentially Poseidon. He is the Lord of the Seas, he dwells in the deeps, and all water is under his domain. Whereas we also have Valar like Nienna, where her job is solely to mourn for the land. Not having a physical domain, but rather her role is to mourn for the land as it could have been but never was. I'll be rehashing some of the names of the Valar I discussed in the previous video during this one. But if you want the full list of the Pantheon of the Valar, then absolutely check out part 1 of this series. It's a really good one. But their job in Arda is to shape the land, form it, and make it ready for the coming of the Children of Ilúvatar, a title given to elves and men who are the sole creation of Ilúvatar himself. They are not here yet, but they are coming, and the land needs to be made ready for them. And of course, we are also introduced to the primary antagonist of the whole Silmarillion, a Valar spirit by the name of Melkor, who, rather than cherishing and loving this creation as the other Valar did, instead desired mastery and dominion over it. And now that he is bound to this creation with the other Valar, he is ever seeking to dominate or destroy the land that the Valar are making, standing in constant opposition with their goal of making the land fit for the Children of Ilúvatar. And now with the stage set, let's get into the first official chapter of the Quentus Silmarillion, an account of the beginning of days and the Spring of Arda. Thank you all so much for watching, and let's get into it. The Ainulindale ended describing the first war of the Valar against Melkor. Melkor was once the chiefest and greatest of the Valar, being given a double portion of all of the gifts of the other Ainur. And so when it is him pitted against all of the other Valar, it is a startlingly balanced conflict. Few details are shared with the elves regarding this first great war, but from what the elves gathered, this war lasted literal eons, untold ages spent in constant conflict. An endless cycle of the Valar creating and building the land, Melkor destroying and burning it, and the Valar rebuilding. They would make a paradise fit for the Children of Ilúvatar, and just as quickly Melkor would tear it down. And this is where we enter the story of the beginning of days. Beyond creation, in the halls of Ilúvatar, the Ainur look out and see this struggle and are dismayed. And so as a last-ditch effort to break the stalemate, one more Ainur spirit is sent down and bound to this creation. This was Tulkas the Strong, mightiest of the Valar. His fury was great, and he relished in the field of battle. And single-handedly he chased Melkor off, laughing the entire time. After this, Tulkas was joined to the other Valar, and ever afterwards Melkor harbored a very special hatred towards him. Melkor has a lot of personal feuds with the other Valar, as you may have gathered. And this first defeat of Melkor ushered in an era of peace. And it's unclear how long this peace lasted, but clearly a long time, as we are about to see. So with Melkor gone for a time, the Valar were able to freely shape the land, make it ready, build a paradise. The lands, the seas, and the mountains were made perfect, and Yavanna was able to plant the first seeds that she had made. Now this paradise was already beautiful, but without the fires of Melkor, it no longer had a light source. The land was cast in darkness. And so the Valar set to work to fix that, each contributing their own gifts. At Yavanna's request, her husband Aule crafted 2 great lamps. These lamps were lit by Varda, the Star Kindler, and blessed by her husband Manwe, king of all the Valar. And these lamps were set atop 2 enormous pillars, taller than the highest mountain peak in the land. One was set in the north of Middle-earth and was called Iluin. The other was set in the south and was called Ormal. And together their light covered the whole of the earth, and they never went dim. And so the land was bathed in an eternal daylight. And with the arrival of this light, the first seeds of Yavanna began to grow, yielding the very first plants of the earth, beginning with the mosses and grasses, but soon they were joined by much greater creations. There were great trees in that time, trees as tall as mountains. Trees which touched the clouds and cast a twilight under their branches. And in this lush paradise, the first of the animals awoke. Animals also fall under the domain of Yavanna. She is not just the grower of great plants, but also the mother of all animals. That doesn't really come up again in this video, but it will in the next one. And in the middle of the land where the light of the two lamps met, the flourishing of life was even stronger. And in this middle zone, bathed in the light of the two pillars, there was an island called Almeren, which dwelt in the middle of a vast lake. And it is here that the Valar made their first ever home. And here the Valar rested for a time, weary from their toils in the earth. And thus began a time which came to be known as the Spring of Arda, the closest the land ever came to divine perfection, a paradise made absolute and perfect. And during this time, Manwë declared a huge feast for the Valar and the Maiar. And all attended, including Aule and Tulkas, who were extremely weary from their toils. During the Great Formation of the Earth, their strength had been at the disposal of all the other Valar in their ventures. So not only were they working on their projects, but they also had to deal with everyone else's projects. So yeah, they were exhausted. And it is at this celebration that the Valar Tulkas and Nessa were wed. They were officially married, and Nessa danced for the delight of all those gathered there. And after this celebration, weary from all of his intensive labors, Tulkas slept. But word of this celebration reached the ear of Melkor. See, even at this time, there were many Maiar spirits he had corrupted to his side, who he used as spies within the camp of the Valar. And in his wrath, Melkor began gathering multitudes of Maiar to his side, and finally decided that they were strong enough to launch an attack. Meanwhile, the Valar continued celebrating at this feast, oblivious to the rising darkness in the north because it was obscured by the light of Illuin. In the regions of the north, Melkor began crafting for himself a mighty fortress deep in the roots of the earth, somewhere that the light of the two lamps could not reach. And he named this fortress Utumno, which in the Elven language of Quenya means underworld. In the Sindarin language, it is called Udun, which literally translates to hell. And from his fortress, his hate and evil poured out over the earth, introducing the first seeds of corruption into this paradise. And though the Valar knew not of it as yet, nonetheless the evil of Melkor and the blight of his hatred flowed out thence, and the Spring of Arda was marred. Green things fell sick and rotted, and rivers were choked with weeds and slime, and fens were made, rank and poisonous, the breeding place of flies. And forests grew dark and perilous, the haunts of fear. And beasts became monsters of horn and ivory, and dyed the earth with blood. It's a very specific point in Tolkien's ideas of good and evil, and I talked about this in the first video, that evil is incapable of creation, only corruption. And so the once lively rivers are choked with slime and become the breeding place of flies. The beasts of the earth are turned wild and they kill one another. Rot begins to fester, killing plants and animals alike. The Valar see this and realize that Melkor is once again at work in the earth, but it is too late. Because Melkor strikes first, and he casts down the two great pillars, Illuin and Ormal, and he destroys their lamps. The pillars fall with such force that they shatter the earth underneath them, and the seas rise in response. The impact forever changed the landscape of Middle-earth. And when the lamps shattered, the whole of Middle-earth was engulfed in flames, and that perfect paradise that the Valar had made was never restored again. Never again did trees grow to the size of mountains, and ever disease, rot, and violence plagued the land of Middle-earth. And in the chaos, Melkor escaped, but he ran in fear, for he heard the booming voice of Manwë from the skies, and the feet of Tulkas the Swift were ever gaining on him. But he managed to fully retreat and hide in his new fortress of Utumno. And the Valar did not pursue him further because they needed much of their strength to rein in the great fires and chaos that Melkor had created. And from this point on, the Valar always restrained themselves, never unleashing their full power, lest it rend the earth asunder again. In their desire to create a paradise for the children of Ilúvatar, they did not want to accidentally destroy the earth. And so with their dwelling in Middle-earth destroyed forever, the Valar looked across the sea to Aman, the continent that would come to be known as Valinor. And this is where they made their permanent dwelling. And they fortified this land against Melkor, raising up a great mountain range in the east called the Pelori. And on the tallest peak of these mountains is where Manwë made his throne and the place of his dwelling, and it is called Taniquetil. And from the heights of Taniquetil, he and his wife Varda could see and hear all that transpired across all of Arda. Behind the walls of the Pelori, the Valar established their domain in that region which is called Valinor, and there were their houses, their gardens, and their towers. In that guarded land the Valar gathered great store of light, and all the fairest things that were saved from the ruin, and many other yet fairer they made anew, and Valinor became more beautiful even than Middle-earth in the Spring of Arda, and it was blessed, for the deathless dwelt there, and there naught faded nor withered. Neither was there any stain upon flower or leaf in that land, nor any corruption or sickness in anything that lived, for the very stones and waters were hallowed. And after this great formation and hallowing of the land of Aman, the Valar built their city there, and they called it Valamar. And at the western gate of Valamar there was a great green mound by the name of Ezelohar. This mound was blessed by Yavanna herself, and she sat there on that hill for who knows how long, singing a song of power. And in that song she poured all of her knowledge and her love for things that grow. And at her side sat Nienna the mourner, and she watered the mound of Ezelohar with her tears. Meanwhile, the rest of the Valar gathered within the city gates and just listened to the song of Yavanna. And as they listened, they beheld the fairest of all of her creations. And as they watched, upon the mound there came forth two slender shoots, and silence was over all the world in that hour, nor was there any other sound save the chanting of Yavanna. Under her song the saplings grew and became fair and tall and came to flower, and thus there awoke in the world the two trees of Valinor. Of all things which Yavanna has made they have most renown, and about their fate all the tales of the elder days are woven. On the mound of Ezelohar outside the gates of Valamar, Yavanna sung into existence the two trees of Valinor. And watered by the tears of Nienna, these two shoots grow into the greatest of all the creations of the natural world. And they were given many names throughout the entire history of Arda, but for the sake of brevity, their names are Telperion and Laurelin. Telperion had dark green leaves, but the bottom of these leaves shone like silver. Laurelin had bright green leaves, and the edges of those leaves glowed with a golden light. And the light of these trees was not constant, but rather they waxed and waned. While the light of one tree faded, the other would begin to shine brighter. And so there were two periods, one at the beginning of the day and one at the end of the day, in which the light of the two trees were both dim and balanced. This marked the dawn and dusk of Valinor, and for the first time in the history of Arda, the day and night were established, and the count of time began. This became known as the first day of the trees. And so the days of bliss in Valinor began. The Valar devoted much of their time to building up this paradise that they had made, and so they seldom crossed over the sea back to Middle-earth. Meanwhile, Melkor was free to roam about the lands of Middle-earth and caused much destruction in that time. And from here the chapter begins to tell us of the big three of the Valar, those of course being Manwë, Aule, and Ulmo, and their specific relationships to the elves who are yet to come. Now there are many groups of elves yet to come. We are going to get to that in future installments of the video, but for the sake of this video there are three big groups of elves. beginning with the Valar Aule. Aule built his dwelling in the middle of the lands of Valinor, and his knowledge of craftsmanship was used for all of the projects of the Valar in that time, building all of their houses, their places of dwelling, great towers, the whole thing. Aule had knowledge of all forms of craftsmanship, from metals to stone to wood, even knowledge of agriculture, though of course farmers also owed a lot to his wife Yavanna in the regard of agriculture. But because of Aule's knowledge of craftsmanship, he became a mentor to a group known as the Noldor Elves. There are many different groups of elves even towards the beginning of the Silmarillion, but the Noldor Elves were renowned among them for their craftsmanship. They learned much from Aule, their mentor, and even built more and expounded more upon the art of craftsmanship, creating great works that Aule himself had not even conceived. It is mentioned in this moment that the Noldor Elves were the first to ever devise the crafting and the shaping of gems, and of these, the greatest of the gems produced by the Noldor were called the Silmarils. Keep that detail in mind for later, because true to its name of the Silmarillion is specifically about the history of the Silmarils through the ages. They are arguably the most important artifact ever in Middle-earth. But not yet, we still have a lot to get through. And of course, we have the King of the Valar and the first King of Arda, Manwë. Being the first king of Arda, he was of course also the first king of elves and men, and from his throne atop Taniquetil he looked upon the entire earth. He also had great birds in his service who would bring to him messages from all across the land. His sight was not perfect though, for the darkness of Melkor obscured much from his sight. This is why he had need of messengers in the first place. And even though Manwë is king, he holds no honor or glory of the title to himself, which is something that his brother Melkor could never have dreamed of. And he and his wife Varda are loved most by the Vanyar elves. And the Vanyar spent much of their time writing poems and songs about Manwë and Varda. And Manwë in turn delighted in their poetry. And next we have Ulmo. Like I mentioned in the last video, Ulmo had no spouse, and he preferred most often to dwell in the depths of the sea, never really showing up on land unless in great need. And he never had a dwelling in Valinor, preferring to survey the whole of the earth from the depths. He governs all the waters of the earth, from the sundering sea to the rivers to the springs of the land, and his song echoes throughout all of creation through the waters. And it is listening to his song from the waters that echo throughout all of creation that the Teleri elves learned much of their knowledge and wisdom. And ever afterwards, while all elves enjoy songwriting and singing, the song of the Teleri elves always had a very unique quality to it. It carried a depth and a wisdom and a sadness that the rest of the songs of the elves didn't. The Teleri elves also became master shipbuilders and forever had a great love of the sea. And while the other Valar busied themselves building up a paradise in Valinor, Ulmo never forgot about Middle-earth. And neither did Yavanna. She never forgot about the Spring of Arda and continued to mourn for the damage that Melkor had caused to the land. A land that was made perfect for so short a time. And occasionally she would travel across the Sundering Sea in order to try and make right the damage that Melkor had done. And Orome the Hunter would also go across the sea to Middle-earth. With his band of hunting beasts and Maiar spirits, he would hunt down the beasts that Melkor had twisted and corrupted. But even as Orome passed through the land, the beasts would return out of the darkness and again wreak havoc on the land. And in terms of the overall relationship between the Valar and the Children of Ilúvatar, the chapter dives a little bit deeper into that dynamic. The Valar never saw themselves as rulers or gods over these lesser beings, because the Children of Ilúvatar were created by Eru Ilúvatar, who also created them. Instead, the Valar saw themselves as elders to these children, offering advice and teaching and counseling them, but never ruling over them. Except for Manwë, of course, but when he ruled over them, it was as a king, not as a god. And at this point in the chapter, we again zoom out to the halls of Ilúvatar. After the Valar had stepped into creation and began shaping the land, Eru had remained silent for an age. He just sat there deep in thought, until one day he spoke again. For it is said that after the departure of the Valar there was silence, and for an age Ilúvatar sat alone in thought. Then he spoke and said, "Behold, I love the earth, which shall be a mansion for the Quendi and the Atani. But the Quendi shall be the fairest of all earthly creatures, and they shall have and shall conceive and bring forth more beauty than all my children. And they shall have the greater bliss in this world. But to the Atani I will give a new gift." Ilúvatar finally stands and declares his love for the world that his children have made. And it shall be a home for his own creation, the Quendi and the Atani. The Quendi are the elves, and the Atani are men. And to the Quendi, Ilúvatar gave many gifts. They would be the fairest of all the creatures of Middle-earth. They would devise the greatest crafts and the greatest created works of all of his children. And they would be immortal, having the greatest bliss in this world. But to the Atani, he gave a far greater gift. The Atani would be mortal, and that would make their lives all the more special. Therefore he willed that the hearts of men should seek beyond the world, and should find no rest therein, but they should have a virtue to shape their life amid the powers and chances of the world, beyond the music of the Ainur, which is as fate to all things else, and of their operation everything should be in form and deed completed, and the world fulfilled unto the last and smallest. See, we know that our time on this earth is very limited in the cosmic scales, and so we approach our lives with a sense of urgency. We accomplish great works and we see projects through to completion. We build our own fate in spite of obstacles, all because of the fact that we know that our lives are temporary. It is finite and therefore of far more infinite worth. The elves are immortal, and to any one of us looking at them, it would seem that they drew the far greater portion in gifts. And yet because of this immortality, they are kind of bound to the confines of the story, if that makes sense. Now, obviously, as I talked about in the first episode of this series, in the realm of Tolkien's mythos, there is a future, a sort of end of days, where the elves and men will all be gathered in the halls of Ilúvatar, and they and the Ainur will sing together and build a new, greater paradise that Melkor will not have a part in corrupting. But for the time that this earth, that Arda, is here, the elves seem to have a greater portion of gifts, and yet they are destined to play out their role almost like a storybook character who knows their own ending. But men whose lives are finite are not bound to this narrative, but rather they shape their own destiny. Picture a fictional character that you're writing, and suddenly they gain sentience and write their own story about themselves. This is the gift that we are given because our lives are shorter. Now I'm kind of speaking in like our and us, but I mean in the universe of the Silmarillion, in Tolkien's created works. Although I do think that because our lives are finite, it makes them infinitely more special, and I think that should give us a sense of urgency in how we approach our lives. But some of this grander cosmic stuff is much more tied to like Eru and the elves and Tolkien's mythology, and less to like our world. I don't want to get lost in the sauce. I know the Silmarillion is a fictional book. Yet it is known by Ilúvatar, the Valar, and even the elves that the hearts of men are easily corruptible, and they are capable of far greater evils than the elves could ever imagine. Ilúvatar, for his part, is unbothered by this. Much like his attitude towards Melkor, he knows that ultimately all of these evils that men will work throughout the history of the Silmarillion and beyond, it will only ultimately lead to glorifying the plan and the design of Eru in the end. But of course, the evils of men do weigh heavily on Manwë. He sees them either turn towards Melkor or to their own selfish gain, and it pains him, but he knows that they must forge their own path in the earth, for that is their gift. The elves, for their part, see the grief that the evils of men cause to Manwë, and personally, they don't get the hype. They know that, much like them, they are the offspring of Ilúvatar himself, but to their eyes, it seems that men far more resemble Melkor than any fair thing that exists in the world. And then finally, this chapter concludes by outlining the fate of elves and men, which I alluded to a little bit earlier. It is one with this gift of freedom that the children of men dwell only a short space in the world alive, and are not bound to it, and depart soon whither the elves know not. Whereas the elves remain until the end of days, and their love for the earth and all the world is more single and more poignant therefore, and as the years lengthen, ever more sorrowful. For the elves die not till the world dies, unless they are slain or waste in grief, and to both these seeming deaths they are subject. Neither does age subdue their strength, unless one grow weary of 10,000 centuries, and dying they are gathered to the halls of Mandos in Valinor, whence they may in time return. But the sons of men die indeed, and leave the world, wherefore they are called the guests, or the strangers. Death is their fate, the gift of Ilúvatar, which as time wears even the powers shall envy. But Melkor has cast his shadow upon it, and confounded it with darkness, and brought forth evil out of good, and fear out of hope. Yet of old the Valar declared to the elves in Valinor that men shall join in the second music of the Ainur, whereas Ilúvatar has not revealed what he purposes for the elves after the world's end, and Melkor has not discovered it. So that kind of ties into what I said earlier. There is at least a small element of the immortality is a curse in Tolkien's writing. Not as strongly as in other works that develop on this concept, like Doctor Who. I love that that's the first example I could think of. I'm rewatching Doctor Who right now, so I've got a lot of Doctor Who in the brain. But there is a melancholy and a great weight that comes with, mountains rising and falling, thousands upon thousands of people being born and dying at rapid pace, meanwhile you stay the same. It is a blessing because you don't have to deal with death, although the elves do deal with death occasionally, and that is mentioned in that text there. But unless the elves are killed or slowly wither away into nothingness, which can happen, the elves will remain forever, having to see this endless cycle of death and rebirth and renewal while they stay the same. Whereas we are not bound to the same fate. Each life is infinitely special because it is so temporary. And eventually there will come a day, at least in Tolkien's mythology that he's constructing, where elves and men will be gathered in the halls of Ilúvatar. Although I suppose in this chapter it says that men will be joined to Ilúvatar, and they don't know what will happen to the elves. Uh-oh, if there are any elves watching this, you're in trouble. But with all that said, that is the account of the beginning of days, the Spring of Arda, and the birth of the Two Trees of Valinor. If the prehistory talked about in the Ainulindale and the Valaquenta is the creation mythos of Arda, then this chapter is about the fall, the paradise that was lost. We see the world in its infancy, more perfect than we could possibly imagine. The animals live in perfect harmony underneath trees the size of mountains, and the land is forever bathed in the light of the Valar, which comes directly from their creator Ilúvatar. It was a perfect land, but it was not under Melkor's control, and that was something he could not stand. In wrath, he toppled the great lamps, splitting the earth and engulfing the entirety of Middle-earth in flame. His wrath and his evil was so great that it seeped out of him, built its roots deep in the land, infecting every facet of this divine creation. Almost like a virus introducing disease and rot into what once was healthy. And from this we get the split between Valinor and Middle-earth. The Valar journey across the sea, desperate to save the last thing that remains good in all of Arda. Not only do they fortify Valinor, but they also make it the place of their dwelling. And they consecrate every stone, every blade of grass, until the land is made not just perfect, but holy, not just a continent like Middle-earth. It is the ageless realm, a heaven on earth. While it is a physical location in Arda, but to travel there is almost like traveling into a new dimension. And it is even an experience that is described at the very end of The Lord of the Rings as Frodo makes his own passage into paradise, into Valinor. And that is on page 1030. Damn, this is a long book. Then Frodo kissed Merry and Pippin, and last of all Sam, and went aboard, and the sails were drawn up, and the wind blew, and slowly the ship slipped away down the long grey firth, and the light of the glass of Galadriel that Frodo bore glimmered, and was lost. And the ship went out into the high sea, and passed on into the west, until at last on a night of rain, Frodo smelled a sweet fragrance on the air, and heard the sound of singing that came over the water. And then it seemed to him that, as in his dream in the house of Bombadil, the grey rain curtain turned all to silver glass and was rolled back, and he beheld white shores, and beyond them a far green country under a swift sunrise. Now, the Valar never truly stopped their work in shaping Middle-earth for the Children of Ilúvatar, but it would never be made as perfect as it was in the Spring of Arda. Thanks to Melkor, death, violence, and rot had been introduced into creation and would never truly go away. But not everything is doom and gloom, and for that, look no further than Valinor to the west. The Valar, Yavanna, and Nienna came together and made the greatest addition to creation itself, the pinnacle of the natural world, the Two Trees of Valinor. And with their creation came the first day and night cycle and the advent of time itself. And with this land established, we will then go on to witness the stories told of the Valar in Aman, the story of Melkor, who for now holds dominion over all of Middle-earth, and of course, the coming of the Children of Ilúvatar. And next time, we will explore the tale of two Valar in particular, and a marital dispute that bled into the very fabric of creation itself. But that's a story for another time, and for now, thank you so much for watching until the end. I am very excited for this series. I love the greater universe that Tolkien created around his more known written works, arguably, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. But in the Silmarillion, which is essentially the backdrop, the history for the actual stories he told, you come across so many great moments, so many powerful characters, arguably some of the best that Tolkien ever wrote. It is an incredible read. I am really enjoying it, and I hope you are as well. In channel news, we very recently surpassed 12,000 subscribers. Thank you all so much. It means the world that you would stick around and support me and support these videos. And if you do enjoy the content that you see and are looking forward to the rest of this series, then consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps a lot, and I very much appreciate it. Apparently YouTube really loves when people do this, when they tell people to engage with the video. So engage with the video. Leave a comment on your thoughts about the things we talked about and whether you're excited for the series to come. And of course, a huge thank you goes out to my patrons, Sean, Happy the Knife, and the top tier patrons, RD and Snowy. Thank you so much for supporting the content, supporting my dream of maybe doing this full-time one day, and I hope that you all are very excited for the projects I have coming in the future. Of course, more of this series, but also other videos. The Halloween video, of course, which I'm very excited for. I'm also working on a Dune Messiah video, so I'm hoping that'll come out before the movie. And I've been thinking about live streaming again recently. I have a Twitch channel if you didn't know. And if I did, what would you want to see me stream? Maybe leave a comment down below on if you would want to see me stream more often and what you'd want to see me do. And for the people who enjoyed my vinyl videos, I have a vinyl related Instagram account. It's basically a way for me to showcase the collection that I've amassed and make it look really nice. What can I say? So check that out if that's your thing. And again, thank you all so much for your support. It means the world 12,000 subscribers is crazy. I never imagined I would be here. Even a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago now, I was around the 2,000 subscriber mark. And so the growth has been indeed more than I could have ever asked for, so thank you so much. And I'll see you next time for the story of Aule and Yavanna and the creation of the dwarves. I hope that you're excited for that because I know that I am. And cut.